It's not every day a mega corporation, one of the biggest in the world, suddenly decides they have an interest in video games, specifically developing 3 of them in conjunction: Breakaway, New World, and Crucible. New World hasn't been released yet as of 2020, after being pushed back a few times. Breakaway was cancelled pre-launch, a video for perhaps another time. But Crucible? Well, Crucible just recently launched in the summer of 2020, only to be one of the few games in the history of gaming to be put back in the oven, aka closed beta, with the promise to fully cook it through this time. Unfortunately, more time in the oven wasn't the solution, something I'm a bit all too familiar with in my own cooking adventures as well, and Amazon most recently announced that they would be shuttering Crucible. But cooking analogies aside, I am a detective, and I have a mystery to solve for you guys on this episode of Death of a Game, concerning the flash-in-the-pan, third-person MOBA shooter, Crucible. Okay, last cooking analogy, I promise. The short story of Crucible starts back in the fall of 2014, when Amazon, following the acquisition of Twitch, would not only step into the streaming space, but the video game space, with a studio of their own, Amazon Game Studios. Well, sort of. Amazon Game Studios, or AGS as it's known, already existed largely as a tablet/mobile game maker up until that point. But when Amazon acquired Twitch, they really doubled down on their efforts to push for a PC game development. It took nearly 2 years before Amazon Game Studios would announce its first project. Well, actually, 3 of them simultaneously. Splitting up the team/manpower into 3 branches, this way Amazon could focus properly on each title, instead of just having one big studio. The studio that would be working on Crucible would be Relentless Studios. If you're going to put a lot of your money into tricking out your ship, you're going to need a captain, or in the case of video game development, usually a couple. AGS would pick up Guild Wars alumni vet and lead designer Colin Johansson in September of 2016. Colin would be reportedly heavily involved with Crucible, where he would position a few other key Guild Wars veteran developers to follow suit as well, such as John Peters, who I don't forgive for Guild Wars 2 PvP, by the way. By going after MMO talent, Amazon might have seemed like these were for the newly announced New World title. However, the bulk of the Guild Wars team would be focused on Crucible. The details on Crucible were sparse, but what was revealed so far was confirmation that the game was originally set to be a 6 vs 6 competitive third-person shooter. Likened to Paragon or Gearbox's Battleborn and the more recently launched at the time, Paladins from Hi-Rez. It seems like the original game was set to be some sort of battle royale, not that different from that BR game Project Darwin, which allowed for the announcer to have direct impact and influence over the game, as well as the spectators and players. Not originally intended on being so much of a hero shooter as much as being a game about intrigue and even betrayal, allowing for players to switch teams and betray each other. The Crucible dev team would swell up to nearly 100 or so people, starting with a smaller team sometime near the end of 2015. The Amazon ranks would be strengthened yet again with a high-profile hire in the spring of 2017, this time coming from the world of RTS games, Lewis Castle, a co-founder of Westwood Studios, one of the developers behind Command & Conquer, which is practically RTS royalty. According to the article on screen, following the Lewis Castle hire, Crucible as of March 2017 was still being described as a 6 vs 6 MOBA shooter, with the betrayal mechanic and the Twitch live streaming mechanics/integration. 2017 otherwise would prove to be rather quiet, eerily silent as one of the 3 announced Amazon video game projects, Breakaway, had rumblings concerning the game being put on a hiatus. Those rumblings would end up being true when in the spring of the next year, April 2018, Amazon would confirm their killing off of Breakaway. One of the 3 horsemen already felled so early in its development cycle, where it would fade into kind of obscurity. Maybe a video for another time, but it's weird that everyone seems to forget about Breakaway and its quiet failure. While development history concerning Crucible is very lock and key, as typical with corporate projects, news about AGS themselves would publicly hit the web in the summer of 2019, stating reported layoffs for the company. These dozens of layoffs coincided with the failure of Breakaway, allowing for a reported refocus and restructure on New World and Crucible going forward. According to the former AGS employees following the layoff, the largest contributing factor in the difficulties working on Crucible had to do with Amazon's newly minted engine, raised from the ashes of yet another successful but controversial game, Crysis, or the Cry engine more specifically. Employees regarding the Lumberyard engine were stating that designing a game with the engine was like driving a train while the tracks were still being laid. AGS's troubles as a company would be chalked up to them hitching their wagon to a relatively unproven base engine with its own problems that they updated and adapted to their very own engine. But if there's one thing that big companies don't like to do, it's spend large amounts of money to develop their own technology. It's much easier from that perspective to get something that kind of already works. Well, the problem is, Lumberyard or CryEngine was not only an engine in development, which was a massive undertaking already, according to the former AGS employees, it wasn't even designed for multiplayer play. If the engine was having developmental issues, it likely meant that the issues were twofold for AGS's remaining 2 video games. I can confirm these engine problems from my time spent testing New World, and was told by employees much the same when I flew out to Irvine, California, and alpha tested the game. By the end of 2019, Crucible is still largely a mystery for most people. In fact, at that point, more people know about Amazon's New World than Crucible. There's multiple theories for this, of course, one of which definitely includes the idea that they were protecting the title as much as possible, but what were they really protecting it from? Eventually it was going to be released to the public, right? For a game with such high-profile developers, Amazon backing it, and the whole hero shooter / mobile style game basically having no hype, no advertisement, no buzz, this was puzzling in 2019 to say the least. Amazon would announce the launch for Crucible in the spring of 2020, set for later that year in the summer, May 2020. It's not every day you encounter such a high-profile title without an open beta or chance to play the game before it launches. Well, unless they stand to lose from such usually. But according to Crucible team head Lewis Castle, Amazon had internal testing teams, but I kind of have thoughts about these internal testing teams. Internal team or not, you need the people who are actually going to be your customers to test the game out. After all, your internal testers aren't really your audience or your consumer base, right? They aren't paying to play your game. If Crucible, which was planned on according to the lead dev Colin Johansson to be a competitive shooter, if it didn't have a healthy enough population ecosystem, the game wasn't going to last long enough to even get its feet set. And we've seen this happen with countless shooters, and we've covered a few of these on the series. Lawbreakers, for example, and Battleborn are the best examples of this. Crucible would put out its first look video May 5th, 2020, proving truly to live up to the name First Look. This was the first real time we had seen what Crucible was. It wasn't the same game it was set out to be anymore. The game now was clearly more inspired by its contemporaries in the saturated field of third-person mobile-style hero shooters, almost to a disappointing level. Crucible had 3 different main modes, the first marquee mode being Heart of the Hives, a 4 vs 4 PvPvE mode that consisted of more typical MOBA-style gameplay. Alpha Hunters is a duo-based BR mode. And the final mode, Harvester Command, is an 8 vs 8 over who can rack up the control over the most harvesters and minerals. 3 modes in one map launching in 2020 was bold, free to play or not. There was a certain concern on whether or not there would be enough meat on the bones, merely weeks before the game was set to launch. Crucible would launch May 20th, 2020 on PC, and the 21st on Steam platform to a joint resounding dud. Featuring a large budget and the newly minted Lumberyard engine, these all had the markings of either being positives or being a negative that could spell the end of Crucible surely. Being the first time they tested the game on a public stage, there was more than just anxiety at the time of Crucible's launch, surely. It was more like, can this even work? Castle explains in an interview with VentureBeat that Crucible from the get-go was made with the community input, and waxed on about how Amazon is so customer-focused. Now, I struggle to find truth in this statement when the game basically had no public, or even serious private interests, or coverage on the internet. For example, their YouTube channel barely has any updates on it, and they only created it like 5 months ago as of 10/2020. Usually you can find information about even the earliest of alphas online from games that are like 20 years old. And yet, I can't find a peep about Crucible. Why was the game so lock and key? Well, following the launch, it didn't take long to see why. GameSpot would score the game a 5 out of 10, stating that the only positives they found with the game were the interesting abilities that characters featured, and how the Alpha Hunters mode allowed for solo players to form dynamic alliances. PC Gamer's review wasn't any better, at 48 out of 100, exclaiming that despite some cool heroes and a neat twist on Battle Royale, Amazon's long-awaited hero shooter wasn't worth the wait. Finally, of the major outlets to review Crucible, there was the IGN review, who scored the new title the worst, at a 4 out of 10.
Crucible's ambitious marriage of PvE and PvP has resulted in a whole that's less than the sum of its parts, especially thanks to the awful match pacing and agonizingly slow respawn system.
Get down.
With continued support, it might evolve into something decent, but the underlying issues will take a massive overhaul to remedy. Instead of putting its various moving parts through a vigorous trial that leads to the creation of something new and exciting, Crucible gathers the ashes and tosses them to the wind.
A large issue was, even though there was 3 modes included in Crucible, there was only one that was truly functional. And what I mean is like one was only actually competitive, which was the point of the game. One of the modes was basically just double the 4 versus 4 mode, which was actually kind of fun because then there was enough people that you could actually encounter on the map. But the problem is that the BR mode, or the Alpha Hunters mode, was kind of not even really an equivalent BR mode to say any other BR on the market. It didn't have items or communication of any kind. It basically was 2v2v2v2v2 with no actual BR mechanics. This is not to mention the giant elephant in the room that most of these reviews tiptoed around. Crucible didn't feel like it cost millions of dollars. It felt and played more like an early access title. For example, the hit marker visuals and sounds. Oh, it just tilts me endlessly. It looks like something I drew with a highlighter on a dry erase board. And even though it's large and obnoxious, you still struggle to even realize if you're landing hits on your target because the game feels so disconnected. Hit registration for competitive shooters is arguably one of the most important parts. Nobody wants to play a shooter when their bullets don't seem to land when they should, right? The problem is, well, Crucible doesn't just have bullet registration issues. It has melee registration issues. It has a melee-based hero named Drakao, and the melee getting straight to the point in Crucible is atrocious. If you thought bullet registration was bad, the melee hit registration makes you feel like your character is on roller skates. Even in more unique and interesting characters such as the plant-growing botany unit Bug, these plants would assist you in combat by shooting your foes, or the large giant hunter with a huge minigun who can boost around. The game just ends up feeling like these genuinely cool and unique characters would be better suited in just another game altogether. Crucible had some fun and unique characters, that can't be denied. Who doesn't want to fly around like Boba Fett and flamethrower people, right? But launching with only 10 hunters/heroes seems like sure suicide, when you consider that Overwatch launched with 21 and Battleborn 25. It's one thing to lack characters, as those are a serious undertaking, but to me, the cardinal sin of them all is that Crucible was repeating the same exact mistakes that many other failed multiplayer shooters committed as well. Failing to include a ranked mode at launch means that you're going to hemorrhage your player base on top of the natural drop in players that happens post-launch. This goes back to my comment earlier in the video about a healthy ecosystem. Amazon are not backing Crucible. Without enough players properly divided up by skill, and simply enough players period, the game wasn't going to function. Lawbreakers was a great example of this on the Death of a Game series, so check out that video on the channel. Another of these repeat issues that Crucible committed was a fundamental misunderstanding of game design concerning downtime. As the Skill Up review points out, you spend like up to 1 to 2 minutes of downtime each time you die in Crucible. This is just simply unforgiving in a shooter MOBA that's designed to be drop in and have fun with your friends kind of game. People won't have fun when they realize that after dying 5 times in a single match, they'll spend 5 of those 15 minutes dead and returning to the battlefield. Oh, and by the way, that's if they even find anybody on the battlefield. A large part of the problem in the game is the sheer size of the map. It's huge. It's gorgeous, but largely huge and littered with AI mobs and points of interest/capture. The problem is, most of the map is not filled with these things, so in a 4 versus 4 match, like Heart of the Hive, there can be entire parts of the match where you don't encounter a player at all. Paragon, the tragically failed third-person MOBA by Epic Games, which I also covered on this series, suffered from the exact same issue and eventually tried to fix it with making a new and smaller map. While reviews and impressions were completely lackluster concerning Crucible thus far, we have seen titles have success despite this. And Crucible, according to Steam charts, was at least peaking at a respectable 10,600 players with an average of 3,575. The key being, well, the games have to be fun and deep enough to pour a large amount of hours into them. Crucible wasn't proving to be that title yet, and within 1 month of population, dropped a staggering 89%, bringing peak players down to 1,692 players, with averages at 360. Crucible's anticipated Season 1, which would likely include the much-needed and much-wanted rank system, would unfortunately be delayed, June 7th, 2020. On top of this, Amazon would suspend the other 2 modes featured in Crucible. This was something that I actually mention and talk about in my Dirty Bomb Death of a Game, and that's the fact that the player base nearly never responds well to developers taking content away, even if there's kind of a perfectly good reason to do it. Kind of like a, well, it's already in the box kind of thing. People expect the other 2 modes to be present in the game, flawed or not. Taking content out of the game is understandable when it comes to fixing balancing issues, but removing 2 modes so quickly doesn't tell me balancing issues, it tells me developmental issues. Those other 2 modes shouldn't have even passed inspection is the point. And at this point, pulling modes from the game weren't going to fix the game's biggest problem of all now: no player base remaining. In a near unprecedented event, Amazon Game Studios would re-enter Crucible into the closed beta phase. In typical corporate fashion though, fault isn't completely admitted here, but Johansson does imply the game was released too early before it was ready. Crucible would function mostly the same for players, but would continuously undergo the planned roadmap changes and more to try to bring the game to a better state. Flowery language or not, this meant that the fire was under AGS/Relentless Studios to perform and do such in a near impossible short amount of time. Getting pulled from the quote-unquote stores meant that Crucible wasn't generating revenue anymore, which meant that it was less appealing to their parent company of Amazon. Still, Relentless Studios was adamant on their roadmap of improvements, and the next few months would prove to be crucial regarding the fate of Crucible. Crucible would be set to shut down and cease development November 9th, 2020 for good. No more zombie closed betas this time either. Amazon would be refunding purchases, which is a good gesture that not all developers follow. Who would have thought that Amazon would be behind the hero-themed shooter that failed the fastest and most epically on the channel? While the latter is arguable, the former doesn't really seem to be. At this point of the video, we usually have many questions concerning the death of whatever game or company that we're covering on the series. Crucible's issues were so bare and public that there's not so many people watching this who are confused by its demise. But when something so obvious seems that way, it really does make me scratch my head and question what went on behind the scenes. How did Relentless allow Crucible to launch in the state that it did? Well, the easy answer is they didn't have a choice, being a subsidiary company under Amazon/AGS, but I think it's just rather cliche to automatically blame the publisher just because they have all the money and might have earned it by dubious methods. Some publishers, like Microsoft or EA for example, are more likely to give you a hard deadline but a large amount of cash to go with it. So that large amount of cash comes with an even larger amount of price tag. If you can't meet whatever ROI or projections, you're gonna get liquidated or shut down. While some publishers that you work with, you have to beg and grovel to get any kind of funding needed for development along the journey. Amazon is very like the former, but that doesn't necessarily make them evil. I'm not a bootlicker here, but what I'm trying to say is this: Relentless had some seriously talented developers involved, and while Amazon's involvement was probably not hands-off completely, we have to put some of the blame on those who designed the game. While the engine and performance and how that affected the development cycle are huge factors into Crucible's success as a title, the inconsistent design of Crucible, I think personally, is a larger one. It's not like Crucible was some ragtag team, right? Since their inception, they had a full production team, and at their peak, they had as many as 100 developers working on the game. A few of those are very notable and talented developers. But the question remains, what is Crucible even? I struggle to even figure this out in my research. I mean, I guess it kind of plays like a MOBA, right? Kind of like a third-person shooter, but it's kind of poor at both of those. The AI isn't challenging either, and considering you spend most of the game killing them, well, that makes it end up being boring. And the shooter part, well, we already talked about the dissatisfaction concerning such. At least with Lawbreakers, we have an idea of what the game was trying to be, even if it was a bit over the top and cheesy, and probably too hardcore of a game in general. With Crucible, the innovations that people cite concerning the game, such as the dynamic alliance system and some of the unique champions, aren't even entirely unique. Bits and pieces of those are kind of present in other games. Crucible not only doesn't innovate on much, it doesn't even pick a tried and true game design that's proven to work and stick with it. In the end, when Crucible doesn't perform at its best, or even if it could perform better, it's still the question of, would such a mode/design be better suited in another game or engine altogether? Not exactly the revelation you want to have for your game, right? And also on top of it all, the part that journalists cited as innovations in the first place, yeah, there was a little known early access title called Darwin Project that had those in January of 2018, by the way. Without further ado, it's my favorite part of the video, the part where I make sure you have been keeping up with the clues thus far, en route to solve the mystery concerning the death of a game, Crucible. Hit the music, Tom. Amazon pushed the game out too early and were forced to pull the game from the shelves. Some hero-style shooters have a crisis of identity. Crucible has no identity. Lumberyard was a new engine in development, and not originally made for multiplayer. Lacking a crucial amount of par-for-the-course features in 2020, the gameplay both in mechanics and feel is clunky and not rewarding, especially when compared inevitably to its competitors. The game suffers from serious design issues, large map, downtime, poor balancing, 2 of the 3 modes not working, and so on and so forth. The nail is in the coffin, and it feels weird the story being over so soon, but a detective has another mystery to solve, and this one, well, this one's a doozy. Thanks for watching, guys.
Listen, there's trouble. Big trouble.